My name is Eric McCoy, and welcome to High While Clean. What will it take is what I've decided to call this show today. And this is really directed towards our young people that are in recovery. Before I introduce my guest today, who is a young woman in recovery, what did it take for her to get to where she is? You know, as our youth believe that they are invincible, and many think that they ultimately know everything, but it's those untouchables that sometimes reach a spot where we can no longer ask that question of what will it take once they hit the end of the road, as a coffin becomes their resting place. There are many things that I can relate to with my guest today, as I began my journey in recovery as an adolescent, only to make those periods of sobriety an opportunity for me to take a break. My decision to use drugs was because it felt good. And nobody could tell me different, as I grew up with the Nancy Reagan motto of just say no. They said no, I said yes. Our youth today are beginning younger and younger. And sadly, we hear stories of 10-year-olds dying of an overdose. How can we educate those who believe they know everything? How can we explain to our youth that invincibility isn't real? Now, I want to welcome my guest today, or actually it's tonight. Ashley, I want to thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You know, your story fits well with this question. What will it take?
It does.
Your drug use began very young. And could you explain your drug use as an adolescent and what happened during your teenage years?
So my drug use really, as really young, like 13 or 14 years old, was just full on. I went as hard as I could. It all started pretty much just because I had this like self-loathing. I didn't like myself. I didn't know why. I felt like I didn't know who I was, and I all of a sudden needed to figure out my identity at such a young age. And I just was very, very just depressed. There was no real reason as to why. I just was. And so I was introduced to meth at 13 or 14 years old. And, when I did that, I really felt like I had all the answers. I felt like I felt like I could finally keep up with the world. And I get what was going on around me. And like, I could finally just like be on the same page as everyone else. Cause before that, I always just felt like indifferent. And I, having found that kind of like peace of mind that came with that for me, I really just pursued it as hard as I could. And then, my whole adolescence was just a cycle of, I would go to rehab, get sent to treatment. And I would cheat my way out of there, like I'd learn all the tricks. I knew how to like make you think that I was going to be okay. Just so I could leave. And then I would do it again. And I'd go as hard as I could until I got sent to another treatment center. And that's pretty much how I spent ages 15 to 18, was in and out of treatment, without me having any say if I'm like ready to go or not.
So when you went to treatment at a young age, were you serious about it? I mean, did you have any interest, or was this just a forced upon?
I think mostly it was forced upon. I mean, like if I had a say in it, I wouldn't have gone. But as time had gone on okay, let me backtrack real quick. So in my first time I went to treatment, when I was 15 years old, I did get 10 months of sobriety. And with that, I was given a whole new group of friends through the fellowship. I kind of got to experience a different kind of life than I was used to before I went to treatment. And these are just like friends that were just sober and they were happy. And so that gave me a taste of like what real friendship should be, and like what a normal like teenager should be doing. And then when I'd relapse again, I would get sucked back into the lifestyle, and eventually like I it would just make my depression worse. Honestly, I was so lost, and I just remember like just wanting to die all the time. And I think in those times are the only like moments where I would say, hey, yeah, I want to get better. And if anything, it's just like, I just don't want to feel mentally like how I'm feeling. It's not like, oh, I want to get sober. I want to like create a better life for myself. It's just like, okay, I just like, I'm tired of being so miserable. So I think that would really be the only aspect that, and then like the friendship thing as well would be the only aspects of like the reasons why I would want to go to treatment on my own as an adolescent.
And who was the one who forced you to go into treatment?
So my mom, I grew up with just me and my mom. And, you know, it's funny because at first, like I was the last kid anyone would think would do drugs like ever. I was a straight A student. I was honor roll. I played the violin. Like I never lied. I never did like anything wrong. Never really questioned my mom, like nothing like that, or authority, anything. And, you know, and so we had this little family intervention thing, and she went to treatment for her alcoholism. And at the same time, like they brought me to this program telling me that like, hey, you're just going to go there while your mom gets better, you know? And that it was actually like a rehab, and they just thought I was crazy. They didn't think I was like on anything. And that's when it all came out that I was really on meth. And, you know, and my poor mom didn't know what to do with me at that time. And so then she got her little parent support groups, and, you know, and I'm like, that was just her go-to, was like, oh, Ashley's like she's acting out or she's struggling. I'm just going to send her to another program because she didn't know what to do.
Now, nature versus nurture. So one of the biggest debates in psychology, and I'll just ask your opinion. I don't know if you can even answer this, but you know, nature basically would say that you are genetically predisposed to addiction yourself. Nurturing would say that you watched your mother solve all of her problems in life by drinking. Which do you think had a bigger impact for you? Do you believe genetics, or do you believe that you watched your mother do this, and so this is the way we deal with life?
This is such a hard question that I feel like in every program I've ever been to, they've asked me that, or they've had me like write out a family tree to trace back alcoholism in my family and all of that. And honestly, like I don't know what to believe necessarily. I mean, like, I think genetics might play a big part for me. And when I look at this question on like a general scale, like not just personalized to myself, I tend to lean towards the genetics part in most cases, because like I don't necessarily remember like growing up and seeing my mom solving alcohol or all of her problems with alcohol. It was more so that's just like what it was, you know, like I didn't equate that with like self-soothing or anything. But then looking back at my family tree, my mom's an alcoholic, her dad's an alcoholic, and I could kind of see the patterns in that regard. But I think that's a very good question. And I think it does vary like from people, like person to person, because there are people who come from amazing families who, I mean, I was raised really like correctly, you know, by standards, but I don't know. I think it varies.
And now you are coming up on 2 years clean and sober as of February.
Yes.
Of next
year. Correct.
And back to the question, what did it take? And I want to ask you that. What did it take for you to get to where you are right now?
You know, I always looked at myself as like none of the consequences, like nothing mattered to me, right? Like I could die, I don't care. Like nothing ever fazed me when I was using. And what it took was honestly, I had to figure things out for myself, right? So I've encountered so many situations that would cause somebody like, oh, now I'm gonna get my life together, I'm gonna get sober, like going into treatment, right, as an adolescent. And then it progressed like, oh, I'm getting sent to youth shelter because there are no more programs for me to go to around here. Then progressed like I'm moving in with a random relative in a different state because no one else knows what to do with me. You know, and at like 16 years old, I almost lost my arm from an abscess, and just nothing seemed to faze me. At 18 is when I had my previous almost 2 years of sobriety. And what happened with that was like, I finally, you know, I turned 18. My mom was like, okay, you want to go like run around and do what you want. Like now you legally are able to do so. Like, so go have fun. And I got arrested after like a month of that, got my first felony. And then like a couple weeks later, this is how I know Jody Barber is I was at a gas station, completely out of my mind, really just like not all there. I was really, really sick, didn't know what was wrong with me. And some lady saw me just sitting outside of there and posted about me on Facebook, like, what can I do to help her? And somebody had seen that who showed their mom, who was friends with Jody, and being the great woman that she is, she like came to my rescue and convinced me to go to detox. And I was there, I found out I had sepsis, and it ate away the lining of my heart. It gave me pneumonia and like all this stuff. And so, you know, I was in the ICU for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden, like, you know, I've had that whole, like, I just want to die, I want to die, like my whole adolescence, and I'm being told I'm going to die. And I'm like, just kidding. Like, I lied. I don't really want to die. Like, this is scary. Like, I wasn't serious. I take it back. And that's what it took for me at that point in my life to get sober. But with that sobriety, I survived purely off of like fellowship, and I got pregnant with my son, and that gave me a purpose, and got preoccupied with those kinds of things. So that's like what I would consider like physical sobriety, but not necessarily emotional sobriety. So then, you know, after that, what it took me to get to this point where I actually have like emotional sobriety and like really living it, you know what I mean? You know, it took like after my 2 years of sobriety, I thought I could get high once and nobody would know. And I just wanted to get high to shut up my head, because it just kept telling me either like get high or kill yourself because you're miserable. So I thought if I could do it once, like I would be fine and my head would just leave me alone. And I ended up on a run for nearly 4 years. And in that, like, I chose to walk away from my son. I chose to, you know, live this lifestyle in the streets and completely detach from what was my life before my relapse. I couldn't cope with the fact that I just gave that all up. It took me, like, I overdosed. I broke my jaw in 3 places. It was wired shut for 6 months. I was in and out of jail. I was losing my teeth. I lived out of a backpack, and quite frankly, like, I smelt. It wasn't really cute anymore, you know? And, but what it really took, like, despite all that, like, none of that stuff ever fazed me. Like I said, like, having a kid doesn't faze me. Physical injuries don't faze me. Like, me being in and out of jail doesn't faze me. What really, like, brought me to this point was I was just tired. Like, I was tired and I was scared and I didn't want to keep dying anymore. And, like, I just didn't have it in me to, like, keep up with all the energy that I had to put into, like, using anymore. So that's the long answer, but that's my answer for that one.
We had talked about this before, and when it comes to your child and you have a kid, and you know, so many people would probably look at you as a horrible mother, as a horrible person,
yes.
As ultimately setting up your child for drug use. And you know, as I was saying before, in my book, Pain, Failure, and Misery Are the Stepping Stones to Success, when the first part of my book is Pain, Failure, and Misery, and I tell a bit of my story. And in the beginning is about the last few years of my use back in 2000 and 2001. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was 7 months pregnant when I met her. And she did a lot of dope. And she was actually the one that brought the dope that when we had actually met. And I watched her through, you know, from the 7 months pregnant up until the point where she actually delivered the baby. And she had zero emotional connection whatsoever with the child. None. And it was at that point when she gave birth that all of that changed for her. And then that is actually how I end that chapter. And I ask that question: can a mother's love overcome addiction? What do you think?
The answer is no. Honestly, because it's like at the end of the day, like my disease, whatever you want to call it, I call it my disease, right? Of addiction, doesn't care that I have a kid. It doesn't care what I have going for my life. Like it really doesn't. I mean, you know what? And something that was really hard for me to accept for a long time was the fact that I did choose drugs over my kid, right? And that I did want to be doing that more than I wanted to be with my son. When I was away from my son, I really, it comes down to like that motherly instinct. Everybody has it. That your girlfriend that you're talking about, everybody has it, even when they're getting high. As a mom, it's just embedded in you. I really feel like, but in order to keep doing what we're doing, or what I was doing, I personally had to completely detach from my son and forget that I even had him. Right? I had to do as much as I could to just like forget about it. Because otherwise, like that guilt just eats at you, and it just eats at you and eats at you. But the fact of the matter is I couldn't run from it forever. Eventually like it caught up to me, and I just like, I just couldn't stand it anymore. But it's funny, like a lot of people will judge me, and that's something that's why I'm so open about, my decisions, and just the blunt reality that like, hey, I chose drugs over my kid for a long time. Because that's the reality of the situation, right? And a lot of women aren't comfortable talking about that. It's something that's like very shameful, you know what I mean? And it's something that I personally judged moms for, or any parents for, when I was pregnant, when I first had my son. I never thought I'd be that mom that got high ever. That was not in like my future whatsoever. And then I became that mom, right? And so now that I've like I'm comfortable with who I am as a mom today, to be able to talk about these things. Thank God.
And I appreciate your honesty. And I think that is really very, very important, especially in society today, because people don't talk about this stuff. We lose.
No, not at all.
We lose people, and people die, and people don't talk about it. And that's something that I think we need to discuss more and more. People need to hear these things. And
I think so.
I will say that drug addiction has nothing to do with love, period. And that's the sad reality behind it. Parents, that have their kids running around doing drugs are always asking that question, oh, does my kid love me? Yes, yeah. But they love the drug more. And
exactly,
when you study physiological effects, you understand that the drugs are affecting the part of the brain that has to do with survival. There's nothing above survival. This was a take 2. I'll kind of throw this out to everybody that's listening. we had to
do a redo.
we had to do a redo. We had an issue on Zoom. I want to blame Zoom, but I don't know. It was probably my fault. The one thing that we did talk about yesterday that I really thought was important, and in terms of that question, in terms of looking at all of our adolescents and our young people, and again, with me, I started drugs at a very young age also, so I do understand it. My years are a little bit further back, as you're a little bit younger than. But the question being, how do we reach the unreachable? How do we reach the invincible? How do we reach those that, have this mentality that I know everything? And it is a very difficult question to answer. But I wanted to ask you the question based on your life experience. And if you kind of thought back at that point in time, could there have been something different? Could there have been another way? Could there have been something different that could have potentially helped?
I don't think so, right? Because I was given so many different kinds of opportunities, and so many different people approached me in different ways. I was offered different kinds of help through different kinds of programs for different diagnoses, right? Like there was so much help given to me. And at the end of the day, like with that main question that you asked, like, well, what does it take, right? And for me to get to where I'm at today, it took me like having to be like just tired and ready to do it for myself. I don't think that me being forced into it in any way would have helped. I don't really think that there's anything anyone else could have done. I just had to figure it out for myself. And when I look at this question, when it's not in regards to me, I hate that answer. Like, oh, they just need to figure it out for themselves. Cause like you said, there's 10-year-olds out there dying. And that's a risk that you have to take when letting someone figure it out for themselves. But I don't know. I liked what we talked about yesterday, though, with the different kinds of approach that we could bring for children. And I think that if somebody approached me instead of the whole DARE program, like, don't do meth or you're going to die type deal, I would have, and more in the like regards that, hey, I'm just like you kind of deal, or like, hey, go figure it out for yourself. I don't know. Can you explain it better?
Yes.
Because I'm not doing good at it.
No. So treating kids honestly, treating them with respect, and telling them the truth. We had talked a little bit about this idea, as my podcast was called Recovering Through Highness. We've now switched it over to High While Clean. And it's sort of based on that premise of, I like to get high, you like to get high, everybody likes to get high. But highness is not a property of drugs. It's a property of people. And I've always felt, and I talked to Jody Barber about this, that, if we went into schools and looked at what their current educational system is and maybe modified it a little bit, and we went in with that mentality of, what, I like to get high, you like to get high, we all like to get high, that's going to open up the minds of people. People will all of a sudden be interested in potentially listening to what we may have to say after that. I really do believe that, again, our educational system, especially when it comes to our youth, is a disaster. As I grew up with Nancy Reagan's motto of just say no, that fails to take into account the minds, my mind, your mind, our desire to understand. And so I think that if we went with our youth and to our youth with more of an honest approach, because again, if I go in and I say drugs are bad, and then you've got kids that are sitting in there that have already done drugs and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? They're good. Right? You've lost those people. If we can work to reach those people that, number one, think they're invincible, and if I can at least get them to open up their mind enough to where they're going to listen to what I have to say, that is ultimately what our tactic is we need to basically explain to them that you are not invincible, that you're not invincible. When you made a decision to return to your drug use, I'm sure you didn't think about all of the stuff that potentially was going to come, that I'm going to go to jail.
No, because it wasn't going to happen to me. It happened to everyone else, but it didn't happen to me. And that's like why I think that your approach to this would be effective. Like maybe would have like altered my path. If, that would be the only chances, because like I just always grew up with that mindset, not even growing up. Well, I guess, yeah, growing up, but even like when I'm like seasoned in my drug addiction, I still never thought that would ever happen to me. Right. I thought I was the exception to it all. And I think if somebody was to come at me and approach me in the way that like, I don't know, just that we're almost equals, you know what I mean? I think I just would have been a lot more receptive with your approach than the kind that I got at school.
It's a real, it's an approach that is non-judgmental. It's an approach that is, I really care about what you have to say. That I've got, the active listening, and I'm really wanting to hear what it is that these people have to say rather than telling, because that's the biggest failure right there. Is that, when people come in and they tell you something, if I tell you something and you don't believe it, it's not going to mean anything to you. If you were, back in your teenage years and I looked at you and said, you're a drug addict, and if you didn't believe it, that would have meant nothing to you.
And even if I did believe it, I would have just completely shut down and not want to hear anything else that you have to say after that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's exactly what I mean by like, when I say that, I'd be a lot more receptive to your kind of approach. Because if I feel an attack coming on in any sort of way, if I feel like I can't relate to you in any sort of way, I would have just shut down completely and not heard a thing.
Have you heard of motivational interviewing?
No. What is it? Tell me.
So motivational interviewing is a tactic that they use in treatment programs, and a lot of different treatment programs, to help people resolve the ambivalent nature of addiction. So, there's days where I wake up and I'm like, yeah, sobriety's great. I'm excited. And then there's other days I wake up and I'm like, God, why am I doing this? I'd rather be loaded. So there's this ambivalence that I think we all go through. And I think for any of us that have really found dependency, we're always going to experience that periodically at times.
Yeah.
I mean, there's days where I think, God, I'm tired. I could use some focus and I could do some meth. That would really help me. They pop in my head, right? And so part of that is just understanding the fact that is a reality. And so motivational interviewing is about helping people resolve that ambivalence. And this is, again, where if we can really create an open door policy, I don't know if you ever felt when you were in treatment programs that if you ever just said, I want to get loaded, how would they respond to that?
They always try to convince me otherwise, and it makes me mad, and then I end up leaving. Nobody's ever like, hey, like, you know what? I get it. I've been there. Like, whatever. It's normal. It's always like, no, think about your kid or like something like that. And I'm like, F you. Like, I'm out of here. Give me my phone. I'm gone. Yep. It's, and I don't want to say that they're coming from a judgmental point of view, but that's kind of how I perceive it. Is that you're judging me as a mom. You're judging me, my abilities. Like, I'm just going to leave. Instead of like getting on my level and like, getting through my head that's normal. Because that is like you said, I feel like that's just kind of like what I just go through in sobriety is like some days I'm on fire, other days I'm not. And it really kept me sick for a long time was like feeding into the fear that like I couldn't feel not okay. You know what I mean? Like any sort of day where I would just, not be really feeling it, or like, hey, I'm really tired, let me get some meth, like whatever. Just little thoughts would just spin into huge ordeals because I just just fed into that fear. I never was given the information that I needed to know that like that's normal and there's no need to fear it. You know what I mean? It's like us feeding into it is like where the problem starts.
I think that's really what happens with a lot of people, is that they aren't honest. They don't come forward. They don't disclose that information to people because they're fearful of them putting them down or them yelling at them or discrediting them or telling them how stupid they are for feeling that way. So motivational interviewing in that basis is sort of, kind of like what you said. If somebody comes and says, you know what, I just want to get loaded, you sit and go, I get it, man. I totally get it, and I could even switch it around and say, you know what, I want to get high too. But now I'm talking about a different highness, right? Not from drugs.
Yeah.
and then helping them follow that story through. Are you a sponsor?
Yes.
Do you have sponsees?
I do. Right now I have 3 of them.
A lot of people that I find in the 12-step program that are sponsors, I also feel, as I've watched many, that I feel that they don't do things very well either sometimes.
Yeah.
Similar to that, if you had your sponsee call and just said, you know what, I just want to get high right now. How would you respond to that? And I've found that the ones that really are the most effective, are the ones that, number one, aren't going to put you down, aren't the ones that just tell you, oh, you're going to lose your kid, or this is going to happen, that's going to happen. Because again, when we're talking about drugs, none of that matters.
Well, so like I've had those calls, and I've had a number of sponsees relapse. But in those calls, like I try to be like even not just as a sponsor, but like my friends that I've known in and out of the program and stuff, like what I try to be for them is like what I needed at that time. So, you know, I try to be that person that's like, dude, I completely get it. And it's normal, right? Like you don't need to act on it. Like the problems are good. It's kind of exactly what I just told you. Like the trouble is going to come when you start to feed into that. Like it's normal, you know, okay. The best way I explain it is like, for how many years have we programmed our brain to respond with the thought that like, hey, I'm going to get high, you know, as a response to like something that's going on in our life or a certain emotional trigger, like something happens. And like, we've spent so many years drilling into our head that like, okay, what do we do as a result of this? Like we get high. Right. And even in like a couple of years of sobriety, like, I don't think it's fair for us to expect our brains and ourselves to just like not even think like that anymore. It's going to take time, and it's not only going to take time, but it's going to take like practice of like responding to these situations in different ways for our brain to kind of rewire a bit. I mean, I don't know the science behind it, but that's like the conclusion that I've made for myself.
They call that neuroplasticity, because you have created a lot of brain damage. Sorry to tell you.
It really has. I swear.
But the good news is that your brain will rewire itself and it will function better with what you have left. So this is why we want to keep what we have left.
Right.
How do we reach the unreachable? How do we reach those that know everything? Or teach those that...
Right. So I think the conclusion that like I've come to is like, you've got to let them have their own process, but at the same time, it would not hurt to come at them with a non-judgmental point of view.
I think part of with our youth is they don't have anybody to talk to.
That's true. Like they're not going to go to their parents in most situations, be like, Mom, like I have a problem with drugs. You're like, I feel like this, like
they're not going to go to their teachers. They're not going to go to the police officers that go to the school and teach them about drugs.
That's true. And I don't think they're going to go to their friends all the time about like their feelings and their struggles necessarily either.
And that's where, if we can, again, be an ear for people, you know, if we can put ourselves out there to where we can, where they have somebody that they can talk to that isn't going to slam them down, isn't going to judge them, isn't going to call the police, isn't going to throw them in a mental hospital.
Yeah.
That are actually willing to listen and to do something. And
yeah.
So you're coming up on 2 years again. And what are you doing today that is helping you make that happen?
Like I told you yesterday, I really think the only thing that like I've done completely differently this time is like work the steps. Only because like I'd never seen the importance of it before. And this time I really had a sense of urgency and was really over trying to figure it out myself, because it just kept ending me up like dead, honestly. Like that was the point. That was my very last like high, was just like I overdosed. I was like, whoa, this wasn't supposed to happen. Like, and I came into this sobriety and these steps with the mindset, like, I'll do whatever I have to do to like not die anymore. And, you know, and so I really think that working the steps, with such an urgency early on in sobriety has given me a sort of foundation to build a life. And, I think that also for me today, it's about just like staying connected and finding balance, because, you know, before I relapsed and I had my 2 years, I got my life, I got my son. Well, I mean, I had my son, but I had my son and then I was working and that was it. Like I wasn't doing anything for myself, like program related, had no connection with God anymore. Like my life was literally just like my son and work, and that was it. And that obviously did not end well for me. And so I think what's really important for me today is to like remember why I get to have this life today. Like I get to be a mom to my son and like actually show up for him today. And I get to like, I'm a caregiver as a job today, which is like super cool. And like I'm able to be a daughter today, but in a sponsor and like just a good influence on other women. And like the only reason I get to do any of that is because like I have this connection with God, and like I've created a foundation in AA, and that's just like what works for me. I really don't think that that's the only option for everybody, but I've just tried everything else on my own. And like, this is the only thing that's like helped me to this extent.
So where's the father of the kid? Is he around?
So, I mean, he's around. Yeah. It's kind of complicated. I mean, he's sober. So, I mean, it's definitely been a lot worse. He's been sober, I think, for about like 18 months now. Isn't doing AA, and it's fine for him. He lives not that far away with his girlfriend now. And so he gets to see Noah, which is our son. We see him maybe like twice a month or so. And like me and him are able to like coexist today and actually be friends today, which is like super impressive after like 4 years of like a very toxic relationship and us using together at the end. But my son is just very much used to just having me or my mom around. So it's not like he asks a whole lot for him. Which I mean, I look at that as kind of like a blessing in it all, that he's not really used to his dad being around too much.
There's not going to be another, what would it take, right?
No, I really hope not. No, I don't plan on it. I have confidence that if I keep doing whatever I do today, like I'm not going to encounter another one of those issues. I said it so nonchalantly, but like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't live in fear anymore of me relapsing, and like the people around me or like people who even know me don't live in fear anymore of like, when is she going to fuck this up? Like, when is she just going to get high already? Because it used to just be a matter of time. And like, now, like, I personally don't even have to live in that fear, which is really cool because I let that fear consume me for a really long time. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, you know, we hear in the recovery world a lot that, you know, people will say like, oh, just go out and do it until you're ready. You hear that a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
personally, I think that's a dangerous statement. I think, you know, and again, especially with somebody that is very knowledgeable about addiction and how it works. Sadly, a lot of those people won't make it back. For the ones that do go out and try it again. I'm also one that fights for people and looks to, you know, help as many people as I can, so they don't have to really fall into all those categories of what it takes, quote unquote, what it takes.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, it doesn't, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the people who say like, oh, just go get high and figure it out, like that, a lot of those people, that's either, I find that that's either what they did, or either they're ones that just like got sober right away with like no problems at all. And like, considering the fact that that is my story, and like I had to go have all those, like, you know, I had to find out for myself. And I'm lucky that I made it back. But considering that that's my story, I have to realize that that doesn't have to be everyone else's. Just because that's my experience doesn't mean that it has to be yours too. And a lot of my sponsees that I've had haven't had that experience yet. And I think it's been a really beautiful thing to watch them like get this thing and watch that that's possible. Because for me, I never thought that that was possible, that like I could get this before I really like effed up my life. So it's been a really cool thing to see that happen for other women.
Well, I want to ask you a question that I asked you last night, and that is, if you had something that you could tell people that could be helpful, especially for our younger people, what would you like to say?
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure this is the same answer I gave you last night, but it's just like not to give up, like ever. Whether you are somebody that's going through issues right now, or like can't stay sober, or like anything in life, honestly, or if you're like you're the parent, or the, you know, one of your loved ones is out there like and can't get this thing, like no matter what, just like don't give up, because that's the one thing that I've never done. Like, sure, I've like given up, but I never like fully gave up. I still had a little bit of fight left in me. And when it comes down to like my mom or even my son, like they never fully gave up on me either. And like, because of that, like I have an opportunity to have the life that I have now. And if I'd fully given up on myself, like I wouldn't be here at all.
So listen to your own advice, right? Don't give up.
I know. Oh, you're right.
Everybody out there has all the answers that they're looking for. They may not see them. And so as a counselor, one of my jobs is to help them pull that information up so they can see it. And then it allows it to be useful. And I always like to do groups with clients, and, I'll even have, some clients that'll be going through these struggles and issues. And then I'll ask sometimes another client, what do you think about this? And they come up with these brilliant answers. And it's easier to tell somebody else than to do it yourself, right? So follow your.
And what I found, the reason behind that is because we don't always feel capable ourselves, I feel that the other person is capable to use all this advice and pull through it. But when it comes down to myself, for some reason, I don't want to say never, but I've always struggled with the idea that I'm just as capable. You know what I mean?
Well, hey, I want to thank you for doing this again. I really appreciate it. It's
thanks for having me again.
And so I want to thank everybody for tuning in to another episode of High While Clean. I almost called it Recovering Through Highness. But again, it's High While Clean now. And I look forward to the next time. Hang tight, all right?